Welcome and thanks for joining us for the American Kinesiology Association webinar entitled Comprehensive School Physical Activity Programs, Implications for Kinesiology Departments. The webinar will be presented by Drs. Russell Carson and Colin Webster, and I will provide a bit more information about them momentarily. My name is Al Smith, and I am Professor and Chairperson of the Department of Kinesiology at Michigan State University. I chair the AKA Communication Committee that organizes these webinars, and I will serve as facilitator for today's presentation. The webinar is scheduled for 1 hour and will be recorded and available for playback. By the end of the day tomorrow, you can expect an email from us containing the link to the recording. The link will also be available on the AKA website. Go to Events and Services and then select AKA Webinars. All microphones and phone lines are muted, so we ask that you communicate with us using the GoToWebinar features. Please type your questions into the question box located in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and then click Send. We will collect the questions throughout the presentation. After the presentation, I will share submitted questions with Drs. Carson and Webster, and they will answer as many as possible during the Q&A segment. Now I would like to give you some background information on our speakers, Dr. Russell Carson and Colin Webster. Russell L. Carson, PhD, is an associate professor within the School of Sport and Exercise Science at the University of Northern Colorado. Dr. Carson received his training in pre-K-12 physical education, sports psychology, and health and kinesiology from Springfield College, Miami University, and Purdue University, respectively. Dr. Carson has over 20 years of academic experience, including as a secondary physical education health teacher, academic program abroad director, and kinesiology faculty member at Louisiana State University. Since 2010, Dr. Carson has been a recognized leader of the Comprehensive School Physical Activity Program Model, CSPAP, and the development of corresponding training programs. He has authored more than 15 funded projects, 40 publications, and 65 scholarly presentations in the field of education, most recently with a focus on whole school physical activity promotion. Dr. Carson is a research fellow of Shape America, the inaugural chair of the newly formed CSPAP Research Special Interest Group, and an active member of the American Educational Research Association. Dr. Carson has co-authored a playground curriculum text entitled Play On and teaches courses in research methods, CSPAP, and school policy advocacy and leadership. Colin Webster, PhD, is an associate professor in the Department of Physical Education and Athletic Training at the University of South Carolina. He is also a senior scientist with the Yvonne and Schuyler Moore Child Development Research Center at USC and a member of the Youth Policy to Practice Research Group at USC. The primary focus of his research is on comprehensive school physical activity programming with an emphasis on classroom movement integration. His research also spans other topics of inquiry, including instructional communication, affective learning, autonomy supportive teaching and coaching, and expert teaching. Dr. Webster has received external funding for his research from Shape America, the LA84 Foundation, and the Ladies Professional Golf Association, and has helped secure over $3 million in grants from the National Institutes of Health. He is a research fellow with Shape America and has been awarded research fellowships with the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science and the Priority Research Center in Physical Activity and Nutrition at the University of Newcastle in Australia. He is also inaugural chair-elect of the new CSPAP Special Interest Group through Shape America. Dr. Webster held a previous academic appointment as a senior lecturer in physical and health education at the University of Wollongong, Australia, and he received his PhD in Physical Education and Sports Studies from the University of Georgia in 2006. Now that you know a bit about our speakers, I will turn over the audio to Drs. Carson and Webster. Thank you again for joining us, and remember please to share your questions in the question box.
Thank you, Al, and thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to American Kinesiology Association and HK for hosting. We're thrilled to be here today. And we're also thrilled to be talking about the topic of today, and that's about comprehensive school physical activity programs. We will try to make a case that a national movement has certainly taken hold surrounding U.S. schools as hubs for promoting daily physical activity opportunities. A movement that we feel can be a key piece to building healthier generations of youth who participate in the nationally recommended 60 minutes of physical activity a day, and therefore, we hope, empowering students on a path to build a physically active and healthy life. The webinar today, we will first talk about the foundational concept to this work and the evolution of that concept, the growing network of support and advocacy that has been taking place, highlighting many resources and the research growth, as well as we'll end with a significant amount of time referring specifically to implications for kinesiology and kinesiology departments. We'll recommend some action steps for current and future professionals, as well as propose some areas of inquiry for research and practice. So central to this movement is the Comprehensive School Physical Activity Model, known as CISPAP or CSPAP, which has gained traction as a leading approach for promoting physical activity through schools. CSPAP certainly seems to be a justifiable approach for creating physical opportunities for many reasons, primarily that schools provide access to 95% of children for 6.5 hours a day in a formal setting, as well as most schools have many of the resources and facilities needed for effective physical activity promotion beyond those available in the home. Central to this model is physical education, and as well as 4 other components. Physical education, we're referring to initiatives that focus on meaningful content during physical activity during school. Examples there could be activity breaks, physical activity before and after school, maybe active transportation, family and community engagement, consider active outings, considering the school as a sense of community for physical activity, and as well as staff involvement, where employee wellness programs can be used as a priority for whole staff movement. We're fortunate to Active Living Research, who has infographics on the relationship, the growing evidence on how physical activity and fitness may help school-age children maximize their academic performance, and provides an overview for the effects of physical activity on the developing brain. Therefore, we're referring this model as well as an active learning school. This is what we propose can be used to initiate active learning schools around the country. So let's take us through a little bit of the background of how this model came to be. We'll start in the 80s, where the basis of this movement dates back to that time, as well as another trend, which was obesity, and of course the health-related problems associated with that. I'm sure you all remember the prevalence estimates of adult obesity maps by state that were put forward over the years by CDC. You also remember the National Health Promotion Disease Prevention Agendas known as Healthy People 2000, Healthy People 2010. A priority area in both of these initiatives were physical activity and fitness, and specifically in 2010, one of the 10 leading indicators was noticed as physical activity. Also during this time frame, there is some evidence to support that and a concern for the growing levels of overweight children in the U.S. And numbers such as tripling in the last 30 years, you can see the percentages there, certainly got a lot of attention. And as a result, in late 1980, CDC proposed a coordinated school health approach as a blueprint for integrating health-promoting practices in school settings. CDC later on, later in the 2000s, recommended coordinated school interventions as are one of the top 10 ways and most promising practices for schools to address childhood obesity. So given this background, we move now fairly quickly more recent years and how this work has been the foundation for what we now refer to as CSPAP. In 2008, CSPAP was developed. There was a position statement that was put forward by Shape America, formerly known as AFERD, recommending that schools and school districts utilize all the opportunities for school-based physical activity. There was also in 2008 the inaugural Physical Activity Guidelines, which issued the first major federal review of the benefits of physical activity. And a chapter in that was active children and adolescents, where the recommendation was children and adolescents should have 60 minutes or more of physical activity daily. I should pause here for a second and also highlight that the reason why we have the slide set up the way it is primarily two organizations that have been really behind this effort has been Shape America and CDC. And so the work as we progress through more recent years, you'll see will be mapped on those two rows, as well as pay attention to the top row. I see a growing number of support entities kind of come to play. In 2009, CDC put out a fact sheet on the topic of youth physical activity in the roles of schools, as well as Beatley and colleagues published an article in JOPERD charging the physical education teacher education programs to consider preparing physical educators to take on the role of leading comprehensive school physical activity programs. In 2010, an initiative that I'm sure we're all familiar by now was launched dedicated to solving the problem of childhood obesity within a generation that was known as Let's Move by the First Lady. And increasing physical activity was one of the 5 pillars to this initiative. CSPAP implementation was a significant feature of the 2010 National Physical Activity Plan. There's an education sector that charged schools to consider their school environment the one to emphasize the importance of physical activity. Dr. Judy Rink published the first text on the topic of comprehensive school physical activity, known as School-Wide Physical Activity. Healthy People 2010 was also put forward, and what's interesting here is that there were now specific objectives targeting younger children and younger populations. Recess and physical education in particular were viewed as charges for emphasizing, should be emphasized a little bit more in public and private elementary schools. And then lastly, the CSPAP model was an integral piece of AFERD at the time's newly launched Let's Move in School initiative that draws upon the expertise of PE teachers to facilitate opportunities for children to be active before, during, and after school. In 2011, the World Health Organization announced a commitment to reduce inactivity, therefore advancing a global strategies to introduce policies and actions aimed at promoting healthy diets and increasing physical activity in an entire population. As well as a national survey was conducted by NASPE that reported that less than 1/6 of schools are providing CSPAPs. Specifically, 16% of elementary schools, 13% of middle schools, and 6% of high schools. As a result, a national 12-month certification program was launched, complete with online resources and mentorship support to help ensure and build a network of physical activity champions in every school known as a Director of Physical Activity. And these individuals were asked to spearhead and coordinate initiatives around the 5 components of comprehensive school physical activity. And the physical education was identified at times as the most logical person to assume this role. 2012, Dr. Harold Cole in the Lancet report reported that inactivity is now considered a pandemic. Nike came to the table with their Design to Move report, which is a call to action supporting many champions that were dedicated to ending childhood obesity epidemic of physical inactivity. And they had something known as the design filters, were considered things that would add up to deliver an early positive experience for children during the critical window of time. A new CSPAP curriculum model was proposed called HOPE, Health Optimizing Physical Education. CDC's mid-course report regarding the physical activity guidelines provide some evidence that was sufficient that multi-component school-based interventions can increase physical activity during the school hours among youth. A 2-part JOPR special issue, edited by Dr. Judy Rink, was published in the back to school issue on the topic of CSPAP, with chapters dedicated to the research to practice implications of each of the 5 components, along with a charge to encourage PE teachers to consider earning their DPA certification. The Triennial Physical Education Teacher Education Conference had a theme dedicated to CSPAP. In 2013, Let's Move Active Schools was launched, which was part of the Let's Move initiative, which is more specifically to focus on increasing physical activity in and around the school day. The Institute of Medicine also published put together a committee and published a text that recommended a whole school approach, and the whole school approach encompasses many of the same components of the CSPAP model. As well as CDC published a CSPAP guide, which had a 7-step process of how one could develop a CSPAP in a school setting. A physical activity learning system was launched. That was an outgrowth of the DPA training. And this was to try to provide knowledge to serve on the knowledge of those to serve as local champions for active schools and the leadership support those initiatives. And AFERD came out with their second position statement, more specifically focused on CSPAP, and here the CSPAP model was presented and formed. In 2014, the World Health Organization established a Commission on Ending Childhood Obesity, known as ECHO, to raise the awareness, build momentum, and the comprehensive responses to childhood obesity. Unfortunately, there was a time for some of us to get paused because a U.S. report card came out which rated schools as a C-. particularly regarding physical activity, amount of physical activity and physical education in an average week. CDC updated their Korean school health model with the work of ASCD, known as the WISC model, whole school, whole community, whole child, that incorporates many of the previous components, as well as JTPE published a monograph on current research surrounding CSPAP training, initiatives, and outcomes. And you'll start to see here from 2014 onward, many conference scenes, symposia, roundtables, and really a growing number of researchers start to convene at national settings to promote and encourage CSPAP research. And that leads us basically closer to today, 2015. Most of these I will talk about in the coming slides. But if you put this all together, we have a very busy and active effort here that has grown and proliferated, if you will, over a very short amount of time, as obesity's concerns have also raised. Which brings us back to full circle. You could argue that we started with this effort concerned about childhood obesity, and some suggested that's a way to maybe uniquely redefine our role. How are we doing with that? Well, the latest numbers are potentially suggesting that we're becoming more stable with the obesity rates for adults in particular. But when you look at the projections for 2030, especially in certain vulnerable populations, we still have a lot more work to do. And as a result, there has been, besides what was presented in the previous slide, tremendous amount of support and efforts that folks have come to the table to support this effort. And as a result, we now have CSPAP, which is considered the national framework for work regarding comprehensive school physical activity and physical activity in and around schools. And all the agency has come to the table really have a common mission, and that is the importance of schools and the importance of physical activity in schools as a way to promote health and quality of life in children. So what I want to do now in the next couple of slides is call out a few of the most recent initiatives moving forward. So we talked about the ECHO report, and they came out with their final report in just this past month. And in this report, they basically presented and called for high-level action to address a major health challenge, and that is overweight and obesity in children. And they estimated at least 41 million children of this age group are considered overweight or obese. They put forward 6 recommendations that were aimed for governments that trying to find ways to reverse this rising trend of inactivity and obesity. And if you look at the 6, 3 physical activity in children is embedded in 3 of the recommendations, with one of them, number 5, specifically addresses the implementation of comprehensive programs that promote healthy school environments. It's also important to note now, moving forward, CSPAP has grown so much that we now have a CSPAP homepage, thanks to Shape America, where you can see a lot of the resources, a lot of the activation grants, a lot of the community support, professional development, and so on. You can see the website at the bottom. We also certainly have the continued work of Let's Move Active Schools, which is now a catchy slogan referred to as Active Kids Do Better. And all the work that's been put forth to show that regular physical activity not only helps kids stay healthy and strong, but can also lead to higher test scores, improved attendance, and increased focus and behavior. To date, roughly 17,000 schools have signed up to get on board with Let's Move Active Schools and are going through a journey where they're asked to evaluate what's going on in their schools, activate through action planning, and also celebrate along the way to try to incorporate CSPAP initiatives regarding CSPAP. A lot of this work is stemming from attending the physical activity leadership training, and actually in the coming months, for the very first time, an Outstanding Activity Leader Award will be presented at a national conference. Related to this, we now have one of our national organizations, which has been behind this from the beginning, Shape America, has put forth a commitment and a goal, overarching goal called 50 million strong by 2029. I'd like to take a few minutes to show a recent video on this effort. So clearly, 50 million strong sets a target for America's health and physical education teachers to get all school children physically active and healthy within 14 years. Why 14 years? Because students entering preschool this fall will graduate in 14 years' time. So how are we going to do this? CSPAP, as you saw in the video, can certainly provide a model for this commitment. And probably what's most exciting in the most recent months has been the signing of what's now referred to as Every Student Succeeds Act. This is a game changer for school health and physical education. It was signed in December of 2015 and replaces it was a bipartisan legislation that replaces No Child Left Behind. You see, health education and physical education were not prominently included in No Child Left Behind, and as a result, programs were marginalized, causing major funding cuts nationwide. However, this landmark legislation of ESSA has the potential to change the landscape of health and physical education programs across the country. Why? Because school health and physical education are now identified as part of a school's well-rounded education. The term well-rounded education replaces the term core subjects used in previous authorizations. Being part of the definition of a well-rounded education puts school health and physical education on a level playing field with all academic subjects. Subjects included in a well-rounded education are able to use funds of Title I and Title II by schools and school districts and states. School health, physical education, and physical activity programs will also have access to significant funding under the Safe and Healthy Students Program within Title IV of ESSA, which means school districts can apply to their State Department of Education for funding for a wide range of safety, health, and school climate programs to include health education and physical education. In a nutshell, states and school districts will have access now to significant funding for health and PE programs. And you can refer to the e-guide on the bottom of the slide there. You see the website for that for more information. So clearly, a national movement, maybe even a cultural shift is taking shape around schools, and CSPAP is now becoming, is certainly at the forefront of this effort. Now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Colin Webster, who will turn our attention to the latest research and future directions surrounding CSPAP with a specific focus on implications for kinesiology departments.
Thank you, Russ. The evidence base for CSPAPs has been accumulating for some time now, although studies have mostly addressed different components of the model in isolation. It is apparent that each CSPAP component can contribute to increasing youth physical activity. Researchers have devoted relatively more investigative attention to PE and other physical activity opportunities during the school day than to before or after school physical activity, staff involvement, or family and community engagement. Therefore, some of the recommended strategies for physical activity promotion are better supported by research than others. In a recent systematic review of multi-component interventions through schools to increase youth physical activity, only 14 studies were identified, and the overall effect of these studies was minimal. Little evidence was available to suggest that interventions mapped closely to the CSPAP framework and recommendations. There is still much to learn about multi-component approaches to youth physical activity, including how to maximize the use of resources both within and beyond the school environment to plan, implement, and sustain CSPAPs. Nevertheless, the evolving translation of research to practice is encouraging, and the implications for those in higher education must be considered as progress continues. As we segue to our discussion of these implications, it is important to remember that the ultimate goal of a CSPAP is to achieve a sustainable program through the coordination of multiple components and the cooperation of many individuals. Galvanizing the collective effort of a school community toward this goal may require advocacy centered on more than just physical activity. Certain stakeholders and potential supporters may be more interested in other possible benefits of a CSPAP. For example, principals at low-performing schools who are aware of the academic benefits of physical activity may be more prone to support CSPAPs. Parents of troubled teams may be motivated to help promote physical activity given its psychological benefits, and teachers working with at-risk youth may find the most value in the social-emotional benefits that could be realized by increasing physical activity opportunities for children, adolescents, and their families. Similar to the information on the previous slide, Bailey and colleagues in 2012 provided a useful organizational framework for identifying the multiple benefits of CSPAPs. Human capital suggests that physical activity is an investment capable of delivering valuable individual and social returns. Any perspective of the benefits of CSPAPs should converge with the understanding that such benefits are ultimately realized and maximized through the support of a broad and multifaceted system that includes not only the school environment, but also the home, community, and other settings as suggested by the CDC infographic on the right-hand side of the slide. The need to tailor CSPAP advocacy to the varied interests of potential supporters is reflected in recent trends that have seen reductions in allocated time for PE and recess in many schools. School-based physical activity opportunities tend to be undermined amid a general perception of administrators that physical activity will interrupt and antagonize academic work. Additionally, schools are busy places. Teachers may perceive adding physical activity opportunities as the straw that will break the camel's back. In research studies, teachers have said they already have too many other things to do besides promote physical activity. Fostering adaptive perceptions towards CSPAP among administrators and teachers is a critical step in program implementation and sustainability. This step can be taken by capitalizing on several levers of support, both internal and external to schools. Internal levers include a CSPAP champion, in other words, someone within the school who is passionate about promoting physical activity, and the school culture, such as school policies. External levers include the efforts of kinesiology departments, colleges, and universities to facilitate adaptive changes within school communities, as well as within the kinesiology department culture. Given the purpose of this webinar, we will focus on using the external support system to overcome possible challenges to implementing and sustaining CSPAPs. The central role of kinesiology departments in promoting CSPAPs is preparing future and current practitioners for CSPAP roles. Pre-service programming for future teachers, administrators, and community leaders provides an existing infrastructure for integrating much of the knowledge and many of the skills important to leading or supporting CSPAP initiatives. For example, many of the courses traditionally offered in physical education teacher education programs could incorporate CSPAP content. Methods of teaching courses might include strategies to include and increase youth moderate to vigorous physical activity during physical education lessons. Sport exercise psychology courses might include theories of motivation and behavior change related to physical activity promotion. And sport administration courses might include CSPAP advocacy and leadership skills. CSPAP content can be enhanced with experiential learning in authentic, real-world settings. Kinesiology majors will benefit the most from service learning experiences which contextualize and legitimize the CSPAP content learned in the university classroom. Service learning will not only enhance CSPAP education for kinesiology majors, but will also increase current practitioners' CSPAP education, as well as provide practitioners with extra support for implementing CSPAP strategies. Current practitioners can gain additional CSPAP knowledge and skills through professional development trainings developed and led by kinesiology faculty and students. Communities of practice can be organized to facilitate the exchange of ideas among university faculty, future professionals, and current professionals in the field. Training current and future practitioners for CSPAP roles has implications for the day-to-day work of kinesiology department administrators. Providing incentives, such as seed grants, for kinesiology faculty to pursue interdisciplinary CSPAP research will be important to generating nationally and internationally competitive grant proposals and funded long-term intervention research, no more 12-week trials. That is imperative to advancing the CSPAP evidence base for best practices. Such research will require kinesiology faculty to be able to form strong alliances with schools, community organizations, government agencies, and other external partners. Therefore, skills for advocacy and partnership building are a critical part of trainings that department administrators provide for current kinesiology faculty. These skills can also help faculty to engage in meaningful professional service designed to translate CSPAP research to practice and strengthen CSPAP support within school communities. Additionally, it would be desirable if department chairs and program leaders or area heads could A, help other faculty to identify the CSPAP knowledge and skills needed for future practitioners, and B, suggest strategies that faculty can use to integrate this content into current course offerings. This table presents a few examples of possible course content for kinesiology classes at the undergraduate and graduate levels. Several of the examples were derived from a recent systematic review of the published recommendations for preparing pre-service physical education teachers for professional roles in line with the CSPAP model. Other examples are a result of informal discussions with kinesiology faculty who teach courses in each of the disciplines shown in the table. At the graduate level, the examples shown derived from the recently launched Masters of Arts in Teaching program on physical education and physical activity leadership at the University of Northern Colorado. We must concede that at this point, we feel ill-prepared to provide a great deal of concrete guidance in terms of what to teach within each discipline as it relates to CSPAP, or how to ensure that anything not currently being taught in kinesiology courses can be integrated to the satisfaction of kinesiology faculty who teach in these disciplines. Continued research and discussion are needed to map out clear and comprehensive recommendations for curriculum alignment across kinesiology departments to optimally prepare undergraduate and graduate students for CSPAP roles. Now, I will turn the presentation back over to Russ, who will finish addressing implications of CSPAPs for kinesiology departments, and then offer considerations for the future as attention and support for CSPAPs continue to grow.
Thank you, Colin. So as was mentioned, we'll focus here now on what the department can do, specifically faculty in the department. It was suggested at previous slides about integrating content regarding comprehensive school physical activity, and here we're proposing a couple more concrete examples. First, with activity classes. Many universities still today offer activity classes. Some are required by their majors and some that are not, taken by folks outside. The bottom line is that CSPAP certainly could be integrated into those activity classes as a way to encourage folks not only to carry on, be active for themselves personally, but also potentially reaching out to community members, encouraging activity with community members in the nearby settings of university setting. Second, employee wellness. Let's face it, all of our graduates, what we hope, will go on to find a job and have a job. And if we could talk about and integrate CSPAP as an important element, and particularly the staff involvement piece of CSPAP, folks could go on to, when they interview for jobs, asking these questions. Our wellness program is part of it, the values of wellness programs, and potentially encourage their future employees to initiate wellness programs. So these are just a couple of examples of things that faculty, regardless of it being in physical education, pedagogy, or beyond, can do in a department to raise the awareness and culture around CSPAP. A second is collaborate with school-based professionals and faculty. There are many folks, and we'll present a slide here in a second, that are on board with this and are doing a lot of great work in and around their communities in university settings. Folks could reach out to these individuals and maybe find ways that innovation can take shape and form to not only promote research but also practices in schools and school settings. Schools need our help, higher education. They can't do it by themselves, and we need to certainly be available and open and reaching out and having folks that not just in physical education doing this effort would be tremendously helpful. Third, translational research. Here we're talking about asking folks to consider, who are not necessarily in physical education, to adopt physical activity as an important outcome to their work. As presented earlier in previous slides with the obesity levels, the pandemic concerns with obesity, and all the growing national support and beyond for physical activity, and specifically with children, why not we consider this population of children, families, communities, and the role of health and wellness, particularly physical activity. It certainly can start and should start from physical activity and physical education faculty in university settings, but we would also ask and maybe charge those that consider to maybe doing some translational research with these faculty members. And lastly, Consider the movement integration spectrum, which you see here on the right. This is for all faculty in their own classes. Many of us teach long classes, especially graduate level classes, 3 hours long. Why not integrate movement breaks in our classes? I'm very, very thankful here at University of Northern Colorado. Our boss, Dr. Gary Heiss, our chair, purchased 2 classroom activity kits that now are readily available for faculty to walk and take into their class and use them for either instructor-led or student-led activity breaks during long classes. And I will say from experience, early semester eye rollings quickly evolved to enthusiastic movement. So it can happen, and actually at the end of the day, students were requesting it more consistently in other classes. If that's too much for some folks, maybe just consider an activity station. So that's simply just having a spot off to the side of the room where students are allowed to stand up and shake and wiggle and stretch and maybe do some sort of movement that will help them reinforce an academic task, such as walking in place or taking a walk with a partner and doing a walk and talk. As well as classroom activity research is going on here at University of Northern Colorado. Yes, I'm plugging the work here because we're very excited about it, from Dr. Megan Salino and colleagues, where they're taking the same concepts and the same models that we see in schools with incorporating movement breaks and energizers to the higher education setting and seeing it has same implications and effects on our majors. As was mentioned, you might think this is just coming from left field, but it's not. There are lots of progress and models of CSPAP integration at both the undergraduate and graduate education. And we feel these are definitely needed as a way to pave the way for increased effort to prepare future professionals. Toward this end, a soon-to-be published special issue of JOPR will feature all 12 of these colleges and universities that are already integrating CSPAP. Some are doing it primarily at the graduate level, some are doing it at the undergrad, some are doing it both, some are doing it through research. And we're very, very excited for this effort, and we certainly hope many, many others on this webinar and others that hear about this work and read about this work will continue to consider and maybe use some of these efforts as a guide for integrating CSPAP into their university settings. We recognize these folks as early adopters, and we hope it can motivate and energize others to do something similar. So as we kind of start to wrap up the webinar, we like to kind of leave us some future considerations, and this is specifically geared towards kinesiology departments. If you haven't got a sense of it already, I think both Dr. Webster and I feel very strongly about the role of physical education. It's not just in schools, though. Physical education has an important role and a very valuable role to play in kinesiology departments. Now is not the time to phase out and cut PE programs. Why? Because depending on your climate, PE faculty can and are being successful with grant funding. PE faculty are, especially those who are incorporating CSPAP efforts, are increasing enrollment for physical education majors. This is happening, and we encourage administrators to reach out and support those who are advocating the integration of CSPAP into departments. Maybe they have faculty who are not on board. We encourage those to reach out to those faculty members to encourage them to get on board, because there is a movement. This is a cultural shift going on. And lastly, administrators, do what you do best. Champion. Be a good leader and champion the efforts of those who are involved in physical education and physical activity in and around schools. It's the very least you could do to support this effort. Other disciplines in kinesiology, so these are the biomechanists and the physiologists and the others, you are preparing future kinesiology professionals in our larger field. So as was mentioned earlier, encourage them to expect their future workplace as a place that encourages and promotes health and wellness. I gave the example previously of employee wellness programs. At the very least, you can model that and do that with and talk about the benefits of that in your efforts. Then when they go out to their profession, they would expect it and demand it, if you will, from their employers. As well as if that's not something that suits your fancy, we all know, we hope, right, that all of us will go on as majors in the field to be a parent or at the very least a community member. And if you go back to the model, family community engagement is an important piece of the model. So as you prepare folks, please highlight and recognize that they are going to be in a community with schools, and maybe they can encourage and expect local schools to adopt CSPAP models. And potentially these future professionals that we're preparing could maybe offer their time or maybe their expertise to support these efforts. Because as I mentioned earlier, schools need our help. And last but not least, kinesiology departments generally. I kind of mentioned this, I'll say it again. Be a model for health and activity at your university. You can do this in a few different ways. Certainly with the requirements of physical activity participation. I know this is going on in various settings right now in universities, where students are actually asked to monitor their physical activity via different actual objective monitoring mechanisms or devices. This is certainly something that kinesiology departments could support, as well as being active themselves for modeling activity, and potentially even supporting active and supportive environments for physical activity, such as a standing desk, such as wiggle chairs, such as stability balls, such as movement breaks in those very exciting faculty meetings that we all attend, right? So these are all things that we can do to promote and encourage movement and health and be a model for movement and health in our university settings. So please, I'm hoping you're hearing our excitement and our enthusiasm for this work. Please join the movement. What you can do, if you're a school or school leader, these are just a few of the key websites and resources that are available. We encourage you to log in, access these, and certainly reach out, give questions regarding any of those, as well as all the organizations that are associated with them. If you are a researcher, consider populations of children, consider schools, reach out to those folks that are doing this work. Particularly, Dr. Webster and I are excited about, and many of us, I'm sure, on this webinar are part of, a handbook that's in progress, where we're basically documenting all the policies and practices and research regarding all the components, and also kind of track out a way to continue this work in the future, and that will hopefully be coming in the near future. This will hopefully be published in the near future. The JOPR special issue I already mentioned, as well as was mentioned earlier on in the introductions. We are now pleased to say there is a research special interest group that Shape America has supported, and our very first business meeting will take place in a few months in Minneapolis. So if you are associated with that organization, please come and join us and see how you can help. And last but not least, at the very least, if you don't care too much about kids and schools and things, which we're hoping not the case, but if that is you, you are going to be a professional in kinesiology. You probably will be a parent. You may even be a coach, but you certainly will be a community member. And we encourage any of those roles to consider any of the slogans that you see here on this slide. Choose it, from TDC's, Nike's, or World Health Organization. It doesn't matter. Use it as a slogan for what you try to do day in and day out for your workplace and in your local community. I'd like to take this moment to say a big shout out to thank yous to many folks who support our efforts. Personally, I'm very fortunate to be surrounded by a true team of colleagues and graduate students at the University of Northern Colorado. I'm extremely thankful to each of them for challenging and stimulating my thoughts each and every day and encouraging regular team building exercises such as the one you see here via holiday sweaters, bowling attire, and a competitive spirit.
And I'd like to quickly just take this opportunity to thank the team members and programs that have supported and guided my CSPAP research. Drs. Michael Beets, Glenn Weaver, and David Stodden at USC, and Dr. Spiridula Vasu at Iowa State University have played critical roles in helping me to advance my thinking about how best to serve the needs of school communities. Their leadership through initiatives including the P2YP, PACES, and CDRC Research Group, and Move for Thought has paved new pathways for CSPAP development and dissemination.
We also would like to say a special thanks to Dr. Al Smith for moderating this webinar, Kim Scott from Human Connects for organizing this webinar, and of course American Kinesiology for hosting and reaching out to allowing us to present on this topic for this webinar. And of course, we'd like to thank you for joining us today and listening to our excitement. I'll leave you with this slide. It was not that long ago that many of us, I'm sure, that are on this webinar thought of the strange idea of CSPAP and the concept of CSPAP and thought it was such a strange term and a weird sounding term, right? And at that time, it was just a dream. Well, in a very short, maybe 5 to 6 years, this dream for many of us has become a reality. And this is so true from what the topic of today's webinar. So we encourage you all out there to dream big. Dreams can happen, and thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you very much, Drs. Carson and Webster. We sense your passion in your presentation, and that's greatly appreciated, and you share several very important ideas. What I'd like to do is invite people to please send any questions that they have, and I can start to see these on my screen now. And if I may, I'll go ahead and start with some of those questions. A first question is, and I'm going to merge a couple here. The model is indeed comprehensive. That's part of the title, and in some respects could possibly overwhelming if one were to consider that in total. So being that progress is often made steps at a time, what might be the keys to create an early positive experience in schools? What would be the first steps that might be able to move, say, a community or district towards implementing this model?
This is Russ. I'll take a stab, and then I'm sure Dr. Webster will have some comments as well. There's been a lot of work on this and some recommendations regarding this. You know, the CSPAP guide is out there from CDC, as well as some research regarding some of this that was presented in this webinar. Well, there's a couple things. First is it's been suggested that just like any new initiative or intervention, if you will, to try to develop a team of support up front. And that certainly starts maybe with identifying a champion to take on this, but as well as getting administration to kind of support these efforts up front. And that can help build a team, whether it be a wellness team, whether it be a physical activity committee of some sort, to help facilitate this effort. So I think one thing, an initial thing, is to try to build that network within your community. It certainly starts with one individual to kind of spearhead. That individual certainly needs to kind of reach out and get the support within their school, particularly administration and other faculty, on a team effort.
Great, thanks very much.
Well, can I add just a quick comment? I agree with what Russ said, and I would also add that the place to start, I think, with any CSPAP is to ensure that the central component, physical education, is a strong component, and that the buy-in of others in the school community will be a product of good leadership and role modeling in that cornerstone piece of the model. Good physical education programming can lead to good overall CSPAP programming in the longer term.
That's exactly right, Colin, and the fact that it's a different color, I think, speaks to that. And many of the folks that are involved with the trainings, I mean, we always recommend that folks certainly take care of business first. So have a strong, quality, meaningful content physical education program before thinking of expanding that outside of the gym walls. So yes, excellent.
I'll move to another question that was submitted. And we do have a range of people attending today. We have researchers, practitioners, and those who bridge the gap. So we have the span. Why don't we start with one on the research side? I heard Dr. Webster make reference to no more 12-week trials, and of course there's probably some reasons why a lot of those studies end up constrained to 12 weeks. Can you speak a little bit to some of the constraints or challenges that researchers might need to negotiate if they're to effectively move forward in testing CSPAP?
I guess since that question relates to the part of the presentation that I gave, I'll start, and then Russ, if you want to chime in afterward, that's fine too. One of the limitations, I think, of at least many of the previous efforts to try to get kids active through schools, including multi-component efforts, has been a lack of representation from multiple disciplines that are key to understanding what the school community is, how it operates, and what some of its challenges are on a day-to-day basis. So I think one of the ways to build stronger research trials, interventions that are taking place in and around schools to increase youth physical activity. One of the key strategies is to make sure that the research team has multidisciplinary representation so that the expertise is there to ensure good troubleshooting can occur once that intervention is being planned and implemented. The other thing, I think, moving forward with these kinds of interventions is the relationship building with the school community. 12-week period really isn't sufficient to, first of all, understand what some of the longer-term implications or possible limitations of the program being implemented might be, and it also doesn't really give the research team the opportunity to become a central part of that school community, and for the school community to essentially adopt that team as one of its own. So I think those are probably some things to think about moving forward. Quite honestly, a lot of the work that's been done with interventions has not really done an adequate job reporting what has happened as these trials have been implemented. And so better process evaluation along the way will also be critical to understanding what some of the challenges are, whether those challenges are embedded within shorter research studies or more long-term studies.
Thank
I would
you.
just add that, yeah, just as was mentioned, that we just need to keep in mind the realities of schools and the schedules of schools, and I think that's related to a lot of this, these recommendations.
We have another question. This attendee notes that big steps have been made relative to school-based physical activity promotion in the U.S., but this is actually an international issue, and so how can we possibly learn from best practices in other countries in order to support our efforts here?
I'll start with that. You're exactly spot on, and clearly our perspective is certainly biased with a lot of the work. We did try to present some of the efforts from the World Health Organizations and their, with the reports and things. But yes, I mean, you could probably make a case that in some ways the U.S. is a little bit behind with some of the efforts that are going on in international contexts and settings. We're very, very fortunate that we have colleagues that are kind of part of this research community of CSPAP researchers who's doing some of this work and reaching out to various countries, Dr. Damian McMullen. Some of her work has already been presented and will continue to be presented in our upcoming handbook. But yes, we fully acknowledge, I know I do, that most of our presentation and our efforts has been focusing on the U.S., but we cannot lose sight of that, and we're so thankful that there are folks on our team, if you will, who are recognizing these larger international efforts.
I would just add that, I mean, underpinning that question is the idea that context matters, and whether we're looking internationally or domestically, every school is really a different place. Of course, social ecological models have helped us in the past to really identify multiple levels or layers of influence on what happens within a school. And having done some of this research internationally myself, for instance in Japan, it's clear that policy at multiple levels will influence, the behavior of school professionals and what ultimately can be the product of those behaviors in terms of children's day-to-day physical activity. So we have a lot to learn still about context and what types of models stemming from CSPAP might work best in different contexts. I think we have a lot to learn from the international community. There are certainly some things that work in other countries and other settings out there that we can probably adopt and that are transferable to many contexts in the United States, but we always have to be sensitive to what makes each school environment unique.
Thank you very much. Returning to kinesiology departments, one question is whether kinesiology departments should advocate for activity courses to be a requirement for students on their campuses. What is your position on that in terms of the pros and cons of that type of advocacy?
Wow, that's a bit of a loaded question. Yeah, I mean, seriously, it wasn't, a few decades ago, there were universities and colleges that did require that, especially for physical education majors, had to pass a certain physical test, if you will, in order to graduate and become a teacher or become a graduate of a program. And it does raise, I think that conversations we're having that again, especially with the numbers we see, with the projections of obesity, and to be frank, sometimes we see some of those things happening within our majors in terms of the inactivity levels. If you just kind of do casual polls with them. My stance is, I don't know. I feel that we are at a place where I think this conversation needs to be had again. I think certainly what's probably a good mid-step to that is those universities who offer activity classes, as we discussed, certainly could maybe make a requirement of those classes in order to get a decent grade, to be active and to track activity, their own activity. I think that's so meaningful and so powerful for individuals. So I think that's certainly a small step to maybe a larger requirement for a program or maybe even kinesiology professionals. But I wouldn't be too surprised that we might even move beyond that small step to maybe for some universities going back to what we saw back in the 70s and 80s.
And I would just quickly add that given that we live in an evidence-based kind of culture within the education arena at all levels, really, including higher education, increasingly, that more work needs to be done, more research really needs to focus on the benefits and advantages of physical activity instruction programs in colleges and universities. There are so many of them, but relatively little research being done currently on the alignment of these programs with recommended best practices and the outcomes of these programs in terms of physical activity intentions or future physical activity of the students who are enrolled in these programs. Philosophically, for me, I'm not sure that I can, at least from the top of my head, identify what the cons of a program like that are. They would appear to really only have pros, but that's coming from someone who's not served in administrative roles. So there could be other perspectives that I haven't considered.
Thank you. Another question that was submitted speaks to the wide array of different resources available for physical activity intervention. And this attendee is curious what you think about the possible need for a more uniform type of approach to physical activity promotion versus allowing for a wide diversity of programs.
That's a great point. Sorry, Colin, do you want to start on that one?
I can give it a stab, Russ, and then feel free to chime in.
Go ahead.
For me, based on what I said earlier related to context, and in my experience working with schools and teachers, to look at what might be the most palatable options to promote physical activity, I would say that probably variety is more realistic than uniformity. I would also emphasize that to examine that term resources, it would be important to identify a skill base or a set of competencies that physical activity promoter has as maybe the most prominent of those resources. I think anytime we get entangled with fiscal resources and trying to look for what might be the best prepackaged programs that we could use or set of materials, for instance, that we severely limit our potential and probably even impact with comprehensive school physical activity programming. I think what matters most is that we understand the needs, interests, and preferences of those who will be charged with physical activity promotion, and that we tailor our suggested or recommended strategies to what those people are most inclined to do as supporters or promoters, and that we provide people with a skill base that they can adapt and use so that they are empowered to promote physical activity in the absence of prepackaged programming, materials, and so forth, but that maybe only some school communities would have access to.
Well, thank you for that response, and I regret that we can't get to everyone's question today. That's all the time we have. I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for joining us, and also thank Drs. Carson and Webster for an outstanding presentation. I actually had a few folks write in the question box and say what a great presentation, so thank you for that. If you would, and I'm speaking to the attendees now, if you please take a few moments when your webinar window closes to complete a short survey on today's webinar. We would much appreciate that. The feedback will help us continually improve our webinar offerings. We will email everyone a link to the recording of today's presentation so that you can view it yourself or pass it along to friends or colleagues. Thank you again for your participation today, and have a great afternoon.